we want to talk a little bit about something that impressed me very much. You were the first person at the board who spoke up about the need for a memory in this business. Talk to me about what you feel the value of a memory in this business, or where it's all started, has for you as a person who represents a second-generation leadership.
Well, I think that we forget too quickly in our business, and I think that there is a history of the industry, and it's not being told, and it's changed from the pioneers and then the second-generation pioneers to people like myself who a second-generation manager, but probably the third generation of people in our industry, just a second generation of my company. And I am probably the part of a dying breed of manufacturers who still exist and exist importantly because the business has changed. It's getting more own store programs, and it's shifting to designers and designer-owned companies. So the manufacturer finds himself caught in a squeeze between the store itself and the fact that a lot of the cloud is going to designer and designer-owned business, and whether that's right or shouldn't be, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there's a switch here, and I think we're forgetting our roots.
We're going.
Put it close to me.
Well, it's interesting to me in the process of managing. There's so much change, as you and I have discussed many times. Remembering how it was is a reference point in what sense? What does it help you do? How does it put things into perspective? In other words, what do you mean when you say it's important to know the roots of this business? How can it possibly help you with what's happening now?
Yeah, I don't think it can help in what's happening now. What I'm trying to say is that this is an incredible industry, and it's in incredible change, and it might be useful for students that'll come in the future to know about exactly what happened and what's happening and where we came from. Do I let it take care of my every waking day? I don't. It seems that today you're just so busy trying to build companies and trying to see other companies not collapse and trying to go forward and trying to make plans for the future that you don't really talk about the past. So what I'm just trying to say to you is that, and to anybody who would listen, is that there is a past, and I, like everybody else, forget it, and it would be a nice thing to have some sort of memory, some sort of history about what has happened, just like they have in other industries, I guess. But, do I dwell on it? No, I don't dwell on it. I'm not happy with a lot of the changes, but the innovative manufacturer has to go along with the changes and hopefully could forecast them. And if he can't forecast them, he's got to react quickly. And those that don't react aren't here. I would say that most of the people that I grew up with in this industry, most of the giant companies, aren't here anymore. And maybe there'll be other giants, but there are new giants. Liz Claiborne's a giant, and they weren't here 10, 15 years ago. And they certainly knew how to react. I think my company knew how to react, and we're here. And I expect to stay here.
Or what's the difference? What's the response mechanism needed now versus what? Well, let's talk in terms of, there is a historical reference point. When you first came into the business, you were a young man who had gone to the Wharton School. You had been given certain fundamentals about business management, I assume. You came into a business that was very different from what it is today. At what point did you begin to sense that this industry was moving into another era?
Well, when I came into the business, there were very few sportswear companies. It was dresses. And then there seemed
What
to...
year?
1955. 1955, I guess, was my first year. And sportswear was was really not a major part of the industry as it is today. And there was a trend, and we started one, and then we started another, and we started another. Try to continue to grow our dress business, and I'm not sure we realized what we were doing at the time. We were just trying to do business, but a whole new era.
Growing a business meant just adding a company?
Trying to do more business, but not realizing that. I don't think we realized that there was a revolution going on at the time, that sportswear was going to become so important. We just entered into it. We fought our way through it. We didn't expect it to be. Truthfully, I don't think any of us realized that it would take over the industry the way it did, and the way it has now, and the things that have flown from it, like designer sportswear today. When you think of the great designers in America today, you haven't really, I don't think you think of them as dress designers. I think you think of them as designers of everything, which includes a lot of sportswear, a lot of suits. When I came into the business, it was just really dresses and coats. We had started a small suit company when I first joined my father, and it was a good company. But I don't think any of us realized how, in the next 40 years, what would happen in the suit business with women working. I think that's a tremendous revolution about all the women in the workforce and what they wear when they go to work. And for a while, they had really, a dress became a special occasion and an evening thing as opposed to something that was worn during the day. And there's a tremendous switch to sportswear. And we went into sportswear in a pretty big way. In fact, we do more sportswear business than dress business. Today, and we do a lot of dress business. But I don't think that we truly realized that we were part of any kind of a fashion revolution at the time. We just did it because we thought it was the proper thing to do.
It was business instinct.
It was an instinct, yes. It was an instinct.
And you went with the flow of how the business evolved, which pretty much was dictated, am I right, by the fact that that stores came in and were asking for certain things. Well, they were not asking for certain things, and you were responsive in that sense. But you weren't leading a strategy change.
Right. I don't think we were leading, and I don't even think we realized what was happening. Because I can't tell you what my mindset was in the 1960s. I was in the designer, in those days I was in the designer dress business, and I opened up a designer sportswear company.
That's how it started for you?
With Casper. First I had Joe and Leslie, and then I had J.O. Sport, which was Joe and Leslie Sport, all designed by Casper. And I can't today remember why we opened up sportswear, but I imagined there seemed to be a trend to sportswear. It was Anne Klein that was alive at the time, and she was doing sportswear, and it was beautiful. It certainly wasn't what it is today in terms of volume, but it was. She seemed to, Claire Mercado, if I remember, they seemed to have a knack for what the woman would be wearing going forward, and we just went in where we felt there was an opening. I think that's what we've done all our life. We've tried to go in there where there's an opening. And we've been successful and we've been unsuccessful, but I guess our track record is pretty good. But there have been failures in the growth of my company. Most of the failures being not conceptual failures, but people failures.
Well, I was going to say, the development of the human resources needed for this industry gets more critical all the time. Would you agree?
It's always been the strength of my company. And that is to put the proper people in place and get them to work with each other and form some sort of a chemistry for the company. And that's when a company grows, when it has that chemistry, where everybody's working together and there are no egos. Or if there are egos, they're all submerged, so there's only one ego, and that's the company's ego. When that happens, it works, and it's beautiful to watch. And, I guess what happens as you get bigger and you try to do more things, you more successes, but you have things that don't work out also. And,
I'm a little confused about that, though. I thought the strength of Leslie Fay companies was in establishing autonomous units that represented a clear marketing focus and reason for each, and the people were running the business, and what you were giving your people was the kind of overall directive financial as well as management overview needed to grow each of their businesses, and that they weren't relying on each other.
no, I meant by relying on each other, I mean relying on each other in their individual...
Within their individual
yes,
companies.
That's what I mean. Having a designer who could
In other words, you're
submerge-
not trying to create a corporate culture.
No, having a designer who could work within the frameworks of that individual company and work for the growth of the company and not just work for themselves, to have a manufacturer who realizes that to have a president who realizes that the goal is to be successful, and how to be successful, and how to get the most out of the people, including the designer, to how to get the designer to realize that a successful company is a successful designer, and to get the production people, the manufacturing people, all of those to work together in one entity for that individual division. That's what I mean by working together.
But hasn't that changed with the designer understanding that the designer is so critical to the business of fashion? And as you say, it has been so elevated to celebrity status that the combination of the entrepreneurial drive and the creative drive has changed the position of the designer within a company.
I would say there's many more unsuccessful designers today than there are successful designers, and the successful ones are the ones who have, I think probably everybody has a drive, but the successful ones are the ones that work within the system, whatever the system is. I just, on the way down here just now, I read a tragedy about a young designer who just went Chapter 11, who's supposed to be very talented. But he couldn't work, I guess he couldn't work within the system or the structure of that company. And those are tragedies.
So the thing that we really began to see when we did the profile on the Liz Claiborne Company, that you need a quartet of quality people representing the four, what I think of as the four main, the mainframe being four: production genius, design genius, management quality, and marketing vision are the most critical change that has occurred in our industry.
I don't think there's any geniuses in our industry, so I don't know if I'd use the word genius, but I would say that those are the four qualities. And how you start off with a company when you really can't afford those four qualities of four different people, maybe. So you have to, one person might have to have one or two of them, or if you get four people, each put up a little money and keep this business small and be willing to suffer until it grows. I'm not sure that we have the people that are willing to suffer today, willing to build. Everybody wants to be big immediately, and it doesn't happen that way.
That's our society, right?
Right. I think the Liz Claiborne is certainly, the four of those people work together beautifully, and you know, I guess they had a great deal of love for each other and great
They had
deal
a
of
mission. They had a mission.
Right, and a great deal of respect, and I think that's really what has to happen.
Well, and that has happened in agency business, as you know. Doyle Dane Bernbach was the great agency because they had someone who understood how to relate to an account. They had a great creative director in Bernbach, and then they had a very exceptional man who could manage and work out the financing of the business. So that combination of talent is critical.
I think it needs someone to hold it all together while it's growing. I went to the opera last 2 days ago, and I watched the La Boheme with a different conductor than I was used to seeing, Carlo Kleber. Cliver, and it was incredible what he did with that orchestra, and which is a great orchestra, and certainly has always played great music. And he did something different to it. He sort of molded it to his image, and I think that's probably what the conductor in a business has to do.
What are the goals for Leslie Fay right now?
Leslie Fay's immediate goal is to reach the $1 billion mark, which I would consider a milestone. I was hoping I'd be the first to do it. I'm not going to be the first, but that doesn't mean it's still not something I want to do. And we'll do that through internal growth and acquisition. It's not easy to do. Very few people have done it. I would like to be part of Leslie Fay when it reaches $1 million and reaches it profitably.
When you say that, you make the figure seem the goal, when in reality, the only way you make that goal is by having a conceptual view of your business. So let's talk a little bit about the conceptual view of your business. It's changed over the years, hasn't it?
It's full of change. We're in areas I never thought we'd be in, and we are in areas that I probably always thought we'd be in. So
Talk to me a little bit about it. Tell me a little bit about the concept. In other words, it's one thing to have as the end goal the figure you're reaching for, but the other thing is to have a sense of what Leslie Fay companies as a totality should represent. And that's why I use the phrase business culture. In other words, what are you growing, John?
I'll tell you what I'd like to grow, how I think I'm growing. My mission, if we have a mission, my mission would be to, what I really want to set out to do is to try to dress every woman in America. Try to have clothes for every woman of America.
Is that phrase, every woman, meaning affordable?
Tall, short, regular, medium-sized, rich, poor, moderately wealthy. I'd like to be able to dress every woman. That's probably not possible, but that was the mission. How it evolves into business is to be very important in the moderate price range, in dresses and sportswear and sweaters and all related items, and then grow a better business, which is that becomes even more fashionable, into all items of women's clothing, including and all sizes. So that's sweaters, blouses, sportswears, related separates, coordinated sportswear. And then go into the designer and bridge areas. And that's an area that was big, slowed up. Now with the advent of the bridge areas has become very important.
What about private label?
And tell you the truth, I've tried to resist private label.
Are you going to be able to?
I don't know. I've tried to resist it. We do a little private label, but we put our own brand in it and just give it to a store. We have now done some things for some stores that have asked us to do some things, and I don't know what part of our business that will be going forward, but I imagine that would all be plus business. I don't want to interfere with the creative and marketing arms of those companies that are doing it, but I think there is an area there that I think private label is there. It's out there. It's not going to go away like I would hope it would, and we have to be cognizant about it. I think maybe one of the problems that we face today is we are trying to sell our competitors, and that is not an easy thing to do. And that's really part of what's changed in the 1980s. And that is that the stores have become manufacturers themselves, and maybe I don't think they've become good manufacturers, but there's no doubt that they're becoming better manufacturers than they have been. I don't think that they are offering their customer what they should be, but then of course I don't own their stores, and it's their right to do whatever they want with their companies, and they're in business to make money just like we are, and they feel that, I don't want to. I don't want to group every store together, but I think stores today feel that they need the private label to compete with the people with the stores in their trading area, and to obviously for the profit motive. Me, I would rather see less management and less layers of management in stores, and more strength in the selling floor and helping customers buy. I think that would be a great way to do more business. But you know, I have a hard enough time trying to run my company to tell everybody else what they should do.
You know what's going through my mind? This is over and beyond the interview that we started. But if the private label thing is not going to go away, and if the ability to produce is a skill that the retailer is evolving as you are, and also the ability to create clothes is evolving as you are doing it. The differential between what you can do and what they can do becomes narrower and narrower. So where then does the emphasis end up? Does the emphasis end up being the critical difference is going to be design, the creative difference? Does the critical difference become, as you began to suggest, marketing, which really becomes a question of your figuring out what is your marketing edge?
Well, I think it's an opportunity also, and I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a weeding out of manufacturers, because it is putting a tremendous challenge on the manufacturer today. And I know I've challenged our people like we've never been challenged before to be more creative in what we're showing to the customer. And I think we have been. And I look at Leslie Fay and its divisions today, Leslie for the dresses and the sportswear in the moderate area. You can't tell that's the same company as 3 or 4 years ago. So what we've done is we've had to go out and try to get to the next step. If moderate basic clothes are taken away from us, we're challenged to get a new form of basic clothing, because a manufacturer that wants to grow has to grow with
middle market,
with clothes that could be produced in fairly large numbers. And so what it does, it forces us to become better planners and come up with new ways of planning our business. It forces us to become better sources of raw material, and it forces us to become better creators. And it forces me as the head of the company to try to make sure that our companies do that. The ones that do it are going to grow. The ones that don't are going to wither. I don't think we're growing with a larger marketplace. I think what's happening right now in the moderate areas, at least, it becomes a larger share of market as opposed to a larger market, because the stores are doing so much private label.
And because the population is now, as you know, not growing. We no longer have the demographic growth, John.
I know, but there's still plenty of women that have never worn any of my clothes, and I pay attention to that.
That's share of market.
I pay attention to the demographics,
but then that's marketing. Then you have to create a high visibility for your brand, and this is what I'm coming to. Now, what Leslie Fay companies, there was a time when a brand, a corporate brand, was what we lived with. We would say Cannon towels. Today, nobody says Cannon towels. They want to see the Dior towel. How can you establish a profile for your corporate brand that benefits each of your divisions?
Well, I can tell you what we're doing. I can't tell you what other people are doing. What we do, as I say, we were challenged. About a year and a half ago, we came up with a grand plan to do something about our moderate businesses. The first being to make sure that the clothes we make were better than our competitors, and and better than what the stores themselves can make. Now, the jury could still be out on that, but I think we've succeeded in changing the image of our clothing. The next thing we're doing is changing the image of our logo, and the next thing we're doing is changing some of the names of our brands so that all of our brands in the moderate area bear the same label.
Who's doing this for you?
We did this with a company called Lippincott and Margulies, and we were in phase 1A, I guess. And phase 1 and 1A was to get the Leslie Fay brand, which will be the surviving brand, to have the clothes look like they could be, that the stores had to want to buy, had to want to buy the clothes. And we developed a whole new emphasis of how we're designing it. We're designing it now in color-related windows. What we're trying to do in a nutshell is take our clothes and out of the rather humdrum moderate dress department, take our dresses out of the moderate dress departments, which really are a bunch of sleeves and a bunch of off-price merchandise, and force the retailer to market our clothes differently than other clothes. In the majority of the cases, that's going to be our own department for moderate dresses, which we will have for spring about 100 of them in the stores.
Have you thought of Leslie Fay stores?
Well, let me finish, because the next thing would be, so we're now going to have Leslie Fay dress departments in stores, and Leslie Fay petite departments, and Leslie Fay large-size dress departments. Now, if we don't have our own department, the way we're presenting our clothes, which is a marketing and merchandising concept, well, the store can no longer put our clothes wherever they want. They must put them together, because we are doing it in a way that we're making it so much easier for them to present our clothes. It's the right thing to do in the late 1980s and going into 1990s, and I'm sure that other manufacturers are going to have to do this. It's expensive, it's time-consuming, and a lot of companies might not be able to do it, but Leslie Fay can do it, and we did do it, and it's marvelous. So if we get 100 stores of Leslie Fay, by spring, chances are we'll have 200 to 300. When I speak to you next year at this time, maybe we'll have 200 or 300 Leslie Fay shops throughout the country. In dresses, and then the next step would be to do the same thing in Leslie Fay Sportswear. And that's how we're planning to go into the 1990s. So that we hope to develop this super brand called Leslie Fay, which will be very important to the stores that still will carry moderate clothing in the 1990s. The thing we haven't talked about here is the trend away from moderate clothing in a lot of our traditional department stores. Now, I don't know if that's a trend that will continue, or I realize that maybe they're making a bit of a mistake, but
particularly with the economy.
With the economy, with the customer probably looking to. I think the theory that they're using is that there's a working woman who's getting upwardly mobile, and she wants to buy a little more expensive clothing as she goes into new positions, and they want to be there for her, and there's nothing wrong with that. There's just, what I think is happening is that they may not be seeing that the moderate customer, the moderate resources are probably making much more effective and exciting clothing than they've ever made before, and they probably could satisfy that woman in their department stores in the moderate prices that they should be in. So by running away from the moderate prices and trying to sell better like they sell moderate, if they don't get better salespeople on the floor, they can't do it, which results in tremendous markdowns. You go into the stores, you see everything a third off, a third off, a third off. So I would say that as stores go upward in their price and in their looks, they have to learn how to present them, and B, how to sell them, and that's their challenge, and I don't know if they're meeting their challenge. What we're trying to do in our companies is realize that there are not that many salespeople on the floor, so our clothes in moderate and in better have to be merchandised and marketed so that there's a better chance of selling on the floor.
Is there ever is there ever an opportunity to think about doing what the cosmetic companies, which is bankrolling the sales force that you need, the demonstration people that you need on the floor to move the goods?
I think there's an article in the Wall Street Journal today. I'm not sure about that question.
Isn't that where we're going?
We're going that way. Yes.
And eventually, if you're setting up the department for them, eventually you're going to have to staff it.
Right. That's the way we're going, and that's the way.
What about independent laissez-faire shops?
I think independent any shops have to have a concept. And it's obvious to me that a laissez-faire store would sell laissez-faire merchandise, and so I think before we have a laissez-faire store, we have to have enough merchandise bearing laissez-faire's name, which is what we're trying to do, because you can't have a laissez-faire store with 12 different brand names. That's wrong. So, but if the store continues to run away from the moderate price manufacturer and tries to fill their moderate needs with private label, then I guess we'd have to figure out how to reach out to our customers. And obviously it's in a planning stage. We're certainly not there for 1988 or 1989.
Let's just take each of the divisions that you have and give me a one-sentence reason why you are in that business. Let's take each of your divisions by brand name.
Let's start at the top. As you know, we hope to be able to say we own Albert Nippon by the time of the dinner, at least, and certainly way before that. But we believe that gives laissez-faire another name to promote in different products. But it gives us an opportunity to reach out to the more affluent customer with a brand that's established. And so we hope we could establish. I can't do it in one sentence, but we hope we could establish that name into other areas. Right now they're in designer dresses and bridge dresses. Hopefully we can put them in better dresses, suits, sportswear. It'll give us we'll grow that name. Then we have Castleberry, which I'm sure you know of. It's a better knit resource, a designer knit resource. I guess a better knit resource today. And hopefully we could expand that on Castleberry's name. But it's a well received, and it's a nice company. It's a good company, a profitable company.
And you have it for what reason?
Well, we had it to go when we started Castleberry. It was to take the place of a company called Kimberly, which owned the knit dress business in those days. Knit dresses have shifted and become successful, non-successful. So that's the reason we did it, and it just became it never achieved the status of a Kimberly, but it has achieved the status of a very, very good, strong company, and hopefully we could, and we should have probably expanded, but
particularly with the working woman.
Yeah,
it's a staple. Knits
right.
are a staple in a working woman, for travel alone.
Yeah. We had to get a definition of what it was we're doing. It's probably taken us a longer time, but it's been profitable, and it's developed into a company we can be proud of, and the industry likes it.
Okay.
So then we go from Castleberry to Outlander. Our entry into better sweaters and better sweater dresses, or knit dress. I guess we should say it's not sweaters but knits. Certainly a fabulous customer base right now, and this is where we should try to move out into a more contemporary customer. So we have Outlander sweaters
versus Castleberry?
A different customer, a little more updated, a little younger, and someone who we now sell Outlander in large sizes, a growth area that we believe in our company, petites, Mrs. dresses, and Mrs. sweaters, and we should be able to. The next step would be at Castleberry to go into the updated sportswear business. have Outlander go into the updated sports business in separates and have a Outlander Sport, more casual weekend wear clothes that other people have gotten to already and have done well. Breckenridge is forward-looking, but not quite as, but it's more for the working woman, and it's a price range we wanted to be in, we are in. We struggle with it, and have just gotten the formula, and now have expanded that into large sizes and petites. So basically what we're doing is taking each one of our names and trying to expand it in the price ranges that they're in. And then we go into the moderate, where we have Leslie Fay Personal, Shapely Glass and Knits, and Summit. And those companies will all become Leslie Fay. And the whole thing is to have one product
That stands for Leslie Fay.
That's Leslie Fay. We're reaching out to the moderate customer. So all our moderate goods will be marketed under
That one label.
Leslie Fay, and that's the theory, and that's where we're going. All the better goods will be marketed under
those brands.
Outlander and Breckenridge, and all the better goods will be marketed under Castleberry. All the designer goods will be marketed under Castleberry and Albert Nifflin, and anything else we might do. Mm-hmm. And that leaves us with our active company, which we bought.
Which is
Head. And Head has just expanded tremendously, and we think there's great opportunities there too. Mm-hmm. So basically what I'm trying to do is expand the business, but combine the names so I don't have to go out and market 20 different brands.
Right.
And it's not as easy as it sounds.
No, but it's very sound. Very sound.
Right.
And very necessary.
So it's easy to say and not as easy to do.
Let's talk a little bit about developing the people to lead each of these companies, and as it relates to what we're doing at the college. Education for all of the essential careers that you've just defined as making a business go.
You know, it's an interesting thing.
What percentage of your people now in critical positions have you hired in the last 5 years?
Well, in leadership positions, probably about 20%.
20% only.
Only from outside.
Uh-huh.
In leadership positions, we've I think in secondary positions, which is the building, the areas where we're trying to build, I think we've probably done a lot better. But we have a young company. I think in the...
you say in terms of chronological age.
Right. I think in terms of leadership positions, I at 54 are probably the... as I'm talking, I'm trying to... I think I'm probably the oldest of top 20 executives, except for the one or two people in the manufacturing area. So I think we're a young company, and that's something that we've
Where are
done.
you recruiting your people from for this kind of an industry?
Well, we either promote from within, or we see people that we think could be interesting and bring them in. And we haven't been. It's interesting because we haven't been a recruiter of colleges, and we're starting to think that along that term now, because as the industry changes,
right.
You no longer want to have. You want to have someone who you could, who doesn't have set line. You could build in your image what you want them to be. But that's all because of this tremendous change. I'd say a lot of our industries people are coming from retail experience today.
Why has that happened?
Probably have a little more discipline, and probably because there's been such a change in the retail way of thinking that we have to understand it, because the interesting part of being a manufacturer is that we have the same customer that our customers have. And the only way to reach our customers is through our customers, because our ultimate customer is the consumer. And until we develop a strategy of just doing it ourselves, which is way down the road, we have to develop a strategy of making our clothes more visible at retail, and I guess we look at trying to bring along retailers to help us do it.
John, you know, the thing that occurs to me is most often when people talk about a company like Leslie Fay and its acquisition program, they talk about it in terms of the need for it, in terms of financing and management. But what I'm suddenly thinking is, would there be merit, or would there ever be the thought that maybe what your company could provide at the top was not only management, but marketing and creative overview? In other words, just as you have an Alexander Lieberman who becomes a creative focal point for Condé Nast magazines and becomes really the bearer of the image in terms of what that corporation stands for, whether they produce a Vanity Fair or a Condé Nast Traveler. Mm-hmm. There's a creative overview, just as Cy Newhouse represents a management overview. And then they have a marketing overview. And I wonder whether that at some point wouldn't be one of the most valuable things that you could set up, that quartet.
Well, I would think that probably that position is probably my position now, along with...
or then define that for me.
Well, a CEO of a company like mine, I would say we probably can use that position, and I probably don't do the job I should. But the problem has been with 12... The problem is how to wed 12 companies that are probably a little more entrepreneurial than most of our competitors. How to wed that into one entity, and that's really where we struggle all the time. And it's been our growth, and it's been the reason we've grown, because we've helped people to grow, and we've helped people to realize their visions and their, how they feel for their company. But how to bring it into one company is something we try hard, and how to get them to understand that not only they're a division head and a fairly autonomous division head, but they're also part of a company that's really growing.
And that there are services, in your company that they could be taking advantage of.
There's a lot of services in a company like Leslie Fay. You see, let me explain this. We build a Leslie Fay, and other people build companies. And we try to give them I know you're talking about the creative services, but there's so many...
marketing services.
There's so many
marketing services, which I feel at this point you are critically in need of. I think you're critically in need of what I call the strategic development for each of your divisions, and they need piloting.
Well, but you see, that's what we're trying to do now with this Leslie Fay, and the chances are there's going to be one or two key jobs created, because Leslie Fay has to have one image in all of their products, like a Liz Claiborne tries to do, and like I don't know who else would try to do it.
Well, it has a criteria.
Yeah.
It has a criteria for business.
And we've developed a company where we try to service each one of these separate customers, and then they all don't have the same thoughts of why they want to wear clothes. But now what we're trying to do is someone who's buying a $300 dress wouldn't have the same reasons for doing that as someone who's buying an $80 dress. But the customer who's buying an $80 dress or a $90 dress might be buying a sportswear outfit that could cost $100. It's the same customer, so we have to develop that criteria. And that's part of what we're planning to do with this Leslie Fay thing. But services that Leslie Fay gives to a company are services that I'm not sure that anybody even realizes. When someone could leave us to go into their own business, many times they've come back to me and they said, my God, I never realized what I was getting with Leslie Fay, that I never knew even existed, and now I have to do it myself, and it's so difficult to do. So what we've attempted to do is get our managers to not even realize that there were so many aspects of this company, of this industry, and of business, the business parts of the business, but they don't even have to concern themselves with. A Leslie Fay company sells and takes an order, They never have to worry about that order being an order that's that they could lose money on because the customer can go out of business, because we take
Credit.
that.
The whole credit.
Yeah, they don't even have to worry about the credit situation. Every time I interview people who are having problems and with their companies, they spend half the day on credit trying to get their money. Our people don't have to worry about that. So there are certain areas of a company that no one even sees that are the strengths of that company. And then, of course, all we have to do is try to be more creative and try to market our goods better in each one of those areas.
Exactly.
And that's really what I try to do. So I might not need I don't think in today's world that a businessman, in our industry at least, should worry about every aspect of their business.
Well, let's get back to you, because you said you see yourself in a particular way. How do you define yourself in terms of your business? What are you bringing to this business?
What I bring to this business, I think, is the leadership and the glue and the recognition, and hopefully some of the dreams, and hopefully some of the actual things that come out. I'm trying to put together a company by attracting the kind of people that get into all the areas that no one even hears about. And those are things that I try to do, and I'm trying to bring the best people into my company.
Now,
and then I'm trying to see where we go next.
I was going to say.
And that's the you can't really go next until you've got a lot of the problems solved until you know you have the organization to support growth into other areas. Like, we would love to be in the cosmetics industry. I've said this publicly a few times, but I would never open a cosmetic company because I don't know how. So I would have to find a cosmetic company that wants to, that would think it would give them strength to be part of my company.
What would you tell them about your company that would make them want to?
Let me finish, and then I know I would have the ability to take over the management of that company in the areas that no one sees, but it's a critical part of the company, and I could free them to do the things that I think they should do to do well, and that's to create and to market.
So
and
you
not
think
have
of
to
yourself
worry.
as a manager?
Today I think of myself as a manager. I always thought of myself as a people person. I always thought of myself as a marketer, but I had less and less time to market, and I'm obviously marketing to less and less people. And because there's so many
taking over the marketing responsibilities?
Well, each one of the people in their industries has to be marketed themselves. And we think we have key people. I think there's about 6 or 7 of the 12 division heads that could speak to management at any level. Mm-hmm. I've tried to make that happen. Laura certainly could. Jerry Zip certainly could. So we're trying to build that level where they don't have to depend on me. I love that part of it. And I don't do enough of it.
That's the most exciting part. Let's talk about Laura. When Laura came into the business, was that a joint decision for the two of you to make? I mean, that was recruiting somebody from within, as they say.
I didn't do it.
Which is amusing, you know. You talk about recruiting from within.
How'd
that happen?
I had nothing to do with it. It was done with Alan Gollop, who's the president of the company, who was like the 5th largest of a group of very, very powerful sportswear companies in moderate coordinated sportswear, and he was having trouble competing with his competitors. And 5th largest meant it was about a $45 million business, which is big, but it was competing with giants, and it was not doing well. And he brought her in to try to do some projects for him. And they worked out a relationship. It really had nothing to do with me. And they worked out a relationship because their business just exploded and that was a combination of 2 people working together so well. And she did not abuse.
How old were the children then?
I guess it was about 9 or 10 years ago. So the children were young.
Had she worked before?
She worked all her life. She was a buyer for Bird Irons, and before that, she had worked all her life. She brought up her daughter. She struggled to bring up her daughter by herself. And she knew fashions. Her parents her parents had stores in Florida, Sandra Post, and they had a good string of stores throughout the chain of stores throughout Florida. She knew our industry pretty well, but they developed a relationship among themselves,
and that's where
she
it took
became
off.
a very valuable person.
Then what happened in terms of the two of you? To give me some sense of what, I work with my husband, so I understand what the dynamics are. How does it benefit you from your point of
Well,
view?
I'll tell you what she's done. She hasn't abused, she's made my name a better name. So that's the nice thing to say, because I think it was a pretty good name before she came around. But she's made the name Pomerantz into a better name, and she hasn't abused it like so many in this industry, so many people have. And she's got vision. She went into Breckenridge when we needed her to go into Breckenridge. She didn't want to go into it because she didn't want to have the day-to-day responsibility of running a company, but she did that for us. She turned it around. Where today it's situated to be a successful company. But I guess, and she developed, people love her, and she developed a sense of being her own person, which I encourage and like. Is it always fun to work with your wife? I don't know if I could work with Laura, if she could work with me, if we had to work directly with each other all the time. We're both very strong, and but she works with Alan. She's a key part of Alan, and Alan's a key part of her. And the three of us together are good.
Is Alan someone I should talk to?
Definitely, it's the President Leslie Fay.
So it's important that I talk to him.
Yeah.
Who else would be able to talk to that you would want to? I don't want too many people.
Right.
Just say, besides Alan, who else?
I guess Jerry Zipp.
Jerry heads up.
With Leslie Fay.
Okay.
Probably Ralph Iannazzoni, or Sandy Meza, who are two of our manufacturing people. I guess you could talk to Joel Newman, but he's fairly new with us, but he's a key attraction to my company.
That's it?
From the company?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah,
I'm talking about key people within your company, critical to you.
I'll make a list for you.
All right.
Is this
All right.
finished?
Yeah, sure. All right.
So let's say, people have already raised some money. I'd say this is going to be I hope we get 1,200 people, but I can tell you we're going to raise a ton of money.
Good. Anything more happening on the banks?
No, but
I'll get those
them.
four.
I'll get
You
them.
think we ought to get back to them, those four that you wrote letters to?
I'd like to write another letter to Bill Carone.
All right.
At Mildred, and I guess the other ones I'm going to hit.
Let's
I've
talk
had further
about it.
conversations with
Yeah.
Chemical. I know that they're going to do
All right.
something.
I don't want to use this time for that now. Let's just keep on. I wanted you to talk a little bit about the college and its relationship to the industry, and what your reason for being involved in the college is all about. Okay?
Okay.
Once you're through with that. I have to keep watching this. I don't want this to go off while we're talking.
Okay. Because then I have to get moving. How I got involved with the college. I guess I don't know how I got involved with the college. I think it was part of my life from the time I really started growing in Leslie Fay. Because when you look back at the college, you look back at the fact that there was no college, and all of a sudden there was a college, and men like Adolf Zelinka and I can't even remember something today, which is why I want to have a history. But Paul Honig, Fred Pomerantz, Mel Dawley from Lord and Taylor. I'm trying to remember the ones.
Krensky.
Howard Krensky, Alan Johnson. I guess Alan Johnson was was a successor to the beginners. They just became part of this. I guess all the people in the suit business, a few people in the suit business, they just seemed to be gravitated to doing something. And all I know is I used to go be led every year down to FIT to be with my father on something. And I guess my father felt it was an important part of our life. And so I just sort of took up from what he came off. And I know we've given the gym to the college, and we always gave scholarships to the college, and he was always important to the college, but he believed very much in education, but not having education, I guess he was a little shy about taking a real leadership position. Plus he was fighting to grow a business. That wasn't easy in those days. It's never been easy, but it's...
I was going to say, nothing's changed.
But it was a different kind of not easy than it is today.
Tell me quick what the difference was. That's an interesting observation.
They were pioneers. You know, I mean, I don't know if I could ever... I don't know if the leaders of today could have been successful 40 years ago, 50 years ago. But I don't think they could have been successful in today's world. But they were the product to become successful. They were the type of people that could fight and get this industry to this plateau where the next generation of people could take it to the next plateau. A lot of them didn't have education because they had to work early. And they were really tough human beings, and the fact that they believed in education for others is really what's important here. So I ended up
taking on
some of my father's, which I never thought I would do, frankly. And I always kept thinking, I don't want to be like my father. He has his points, and I want to have my points, and I ended up being just like him.
Not quite. A little broader. A little broader,
yeah, but not as broad as I would hope I was going to become.
John.
So what happens, I guess, is I just took on the mantle for a few of the things. Don't forget, my dad was interested in 20 different charities, and I didn't want to be part of those because I wanted to have some of my own interests, and I didn't necessarily have to be a successor generation, as you say, in everything he did, but in this I did. And I think it's important that we should go on. We should leave something, like we had something left to us that we were able to grow on. I think that probably we should leave something for someone else to grow on. You know, it's interesting. I was at the antique show the other day, and I was standing next to Calvin Klein, and all of a sudden someone came over and they wanted to take pictures. They asked me to get out of the way when they wanted to take pictures. And I said to Calvin, I said, you know, that, and he apologized, and I said, you don't have to, because you will probably be one of the pop artists of the. I mean, someone's going to say, like I struggled to try to buy a Renoir or I mean, there's someone today that 100 years from now or 70 years from now is going to want to have something that you or someone else, you're going to be the next generation's pop artist. And I said, no, I'm not a pop artist, and I can't be a pop artist. So I guess what happens is we're planting for the future. And you can plan for the future in every place you go. And working.
Are you much involved with the curriculum development at the college?
No. I wish I could do more. I hope one day to do a lot more.
No, I was just curious myself, John. I think you
no.
could make an enormous contribution if you had some part of what might be this management. See, you know, I talked with you about it, a series on management for this industry. No one is teaching it. No one is teaching. No one's even doing what you did at Wharton School. Certainly you do at Harvard, which is the whole case method way of learning about how to manage a business.
Well, I think all the times I'd love to see us, you know, I'm on board of the Wharton School, and I was trying to figure out a way to almost get the two schools involved. It's not an easy thing to do, but I spoke the other day. I spoke the other day to the president of Wilkes College, who and trying to figure how to is there a way to get other schools involved with FIT?
Wilkes College is where?
It's in Wilkes-Barre where my company is.
I see.
And it's just, we just were talking about,
yeah.
How to go to the next step and maybe combine studies with a couple of
courses.
FIT somehow.
Yeah.
And I'd love to see it done with Wharton.
I think that would be fabulous.
But Wharton, Wharton up until October 19th really became it was a factory for people who want to go into the Wall Street and investment management, and now maybe they have to start going into some of the management trades.
I think so. I think it's worth thinking about.
Yeah, well,
let's do this. I haven't got too much time with you. I would love to spend another hour, and I know you don't have it. So let's do this. Let's take critical passage times in your life. Let's take Wharton School. What was the most critical thing that came out of it for you? What's your memory of what was the most important thing you got out of that?
Immediately when I got out of it, I didn't feel I got a lot out of it immediately. What happened is I think I got the ability to look at problems, but you don't realize you have that ability. Maybe today's Wharton graduate thinks of themselves as a complete business manager who could just go out there and they do. The Harvard School and the business school, they feel that they want to go out and conquer the world. At that time, I was one of the few people in the Wharton School that graduated and immediately was thrown into a manufacturing environment, and I didn't know what I got out of Wharton School at the time because I was thrown into a different kind of an environment. But I think what Wharton gave me was the ability to think better and to sort out problems that are business related and to come to some sort of answers. And I think it helped me become a leader. But I think I got a lot of that from my prep school when I was at military school, and I became a leader there. And having the ability to lead is something that it's not a God-given thing. It's not easy for a lot of people to recognize that they can be leaders.
And had to learn it.
Right, and and leading is an interesting word that probably could be a whole day of conversation too, because you've got to be.
How do you lead?
Are you a good leader? Are you a bad leader? But I'd say that the two things I got out of Wharton and my military school were the ability to lead and the ability to think, which helps make you a leader.
Next big passage point, your involvement with your father at the business?
Next big passage point, I think, and the one that was crucial to me was to get my father's respect, which probably I never got until maybe the very end. But I needed to get my own respect, which was very important. And running my own division, it was owned by Leslie Fay, but it was not a part of Leslie Fay in a way because it was a different price range, it was a different world. And being successful and being, making a name. I mean, I took my father, I became a Pomerantz. Pomerantz is a decent name. It doesn't, it's never going to go into the annals with the Washingtons and the Jeffersons. I don't mean it that way.
Oh, really?
But it's, in our industry, to have that name when I was coming up, he was.
Come on! I know what that name represented.
So to take it and make it even more important was interesting for me. But to make the name John Pomerantz means something. And, I spent most of my life. People would come over and say. This is Fred Pomerantz, and I'd say it's John, it's not Fred. You never heard of Pomerantz without Fred.
Right.
And I still get it once in a while, but I think the idea that I made Pomerantz to be John Pomerantz was a nice thing.
Exactly.
So that was the next thing to go out on my own, even though with Leslie Fay Company and become successful in the designer business. And what happened...
I did want to ask one thing. You said the most important thing in that next move for you was gaining the respect of your dad, but more important, building your own sense of your own self, your self-worth.
Right.
What really did it for you? Not just the success of a business company. What else?
Well, that was an ongoing thing. I don't think I really got the. what happened to me is when then the next thing I did was become president of Leslie Fay, which I guess I have to be president of Leslie Fay because I was the next person to become president. But it was a very rocky time with my father. And because before that there was someone between us, like there's between with Laura and myself, but then there wasn't, and we had a hard time, and he didn't believe I was taking the company the right way, and finally he wanted to sell it, and I bought it with some other people. When I bought it
From him?
When I bought it from him in public, but most, he was the big stockholder, I then he didn't think it would work, and it worked beautifully at the time, and everybody started talking about his son and his son and his son, and all of a sudden he became John's son instead of me becoming Fred's father, and that was that was sort of the passing.
The turning point.
Yeah. Now I'm becoming Laura's husband, so I'll do the same thing.
I love it. All right.
Really, those were the
that was that.
Having my own company, then becoming president, then becoming a president that had gained some respect in this business, and finally at the end gaining my father's
What was
respect.
the impetus to go public the first time?
I wasn't. It was 1962, and I really was still a kid struggling up. I don't know. I think we did it because everybody was not everybody was doing it, but one or two people were doing it,
right.
and he thought it would be good, and it was a way to legitimatize yourself and get you out of just being a dress manufacturer, and I think become, today when you look at my company, I think that, I didn't have anything to do with going public the first time, because I was, like I said, I was struggling to just be part of the company and be part of myself. I think what it did was it brought some of these companies that did it into a different level, and we no longer were smart garmentos. We became other people were buying and selling their company every day. So it brought a level of respect, and it brought some. Obviously, it brought us some of the finance we needed to grow, even though we were growing like topsy at the time.
What are your own views currently of the role of Wall Street and the fashion industry?
Well, the fashion industry, to a great extent, is dependent on the retail industry and in Wall Street's eyes. And I think that Wall Street probably feels that for every that there's Liz Claiborne, and then there's the rest of the industry. And I always felt that I was above the industry also, but I haven't been able to tell Wall Street that yet. And I've tried to put my company above. What I've tried to do is elevate our industry a little through my behavior and my growth and the growth of my company and the way people look at me and look at my company. But I must say that I haven't done a stronger job at Wall Street as I think I should have.
You know Peter Solomon?
Yeah.
I have something that I'm going to Xerox for you that he sent me. I'm on the board with him at Phillips and Hewson.
Yeah.
And I want you to, I think you'll enjoy this. I think it's
I think I read it.
Did you read it?
Yeah, aloud. Who sent it to me? Gilbert Harris.
All right, okay.
Yeah,
What did you think of it? Did you think it was brilliant?
Yeah, it was good. Yeah. I remember thinking it was well written at that time.
All right, let's go on to next passage. After that, what was the big passage point for you?
Well, in business, I'd say that that I don't have anything else to prove, and the only thing I would like to do now is just grow and try to grow as a human being, and trying to grow as a businessman, and trying to attract bright young people to come and hopefully make my company better. But I don't have any more passages, I think, of life to in our industry at least. I don't.
Well, let's round out. Then this is the perfect way for us to conclude the interview. Let's spend the next 10 minutes on growing as a human being. Tell us a little bit about your personal involvements and interests.
Well,
what you really care about.
I tell you, I don't know how I'll grow as a human being. I think all the time of what I'll do after I stop working, when I pass the mantle on. It can't be too many years, because you can't keep young people unless you let them grow. they can't get to a position where they're, what's been good and bad about the past year and a half is that we faced more challenges, and it challenges someone like me to come up with answers, and my people come up with answers. So it's been exciting, even though it might not have been it's been a wonderful opportunity to reshape your company into what you think is going to be the next several years of growth. And I think that along the way to do that, and that's been exciting. I don't know. I look at some of my friends on Wall Street, and what do they do? I don't think I want this to be part of anything. I'm just saying that, do they create anything? They don't create anything. I don't know what I'd like to do. Maybe get involved with a college. I don't have the overwhelming desire to just make more and more money for myself, even though I like it and I like to have nice things. But I struggle where I go next, so I don't know. I'm not really equipped.
Let's talk about your personal interests now. You're a man who's involved in many things now. Your life is broadened out. You're certainly not you're not the traditional businessman whose life is totally fixated on the business. You are part of a bigger world now.
My next part of me will not be I don't think I'll do anything else in the business world, because I don't know what I could do. I mean, I am a product of our industry, and I don't think I can go in and go back. I couldn't go to Wall Street. I don't know anything really.
But you could do something at the college.
I could do something.
You could become a very important part of a what we talk about, a resident business educator.
I could do that. I could maybe. I joke all the time, but I would probably be interested if Shirley wasn't there and I was free. I wouldn't mind doing that. But I don't know yet. I think that it's. I don't know. I like to travel. I like to see places. I wouldn't mind. I joke. I say, but I'd love to play golf. By the time I have time to play golf, I won't have the physical ability to play.
Everybody says that.
I know that I can never.
When did your interest in art evolve?
When my interest in money evolved. I started going to places and seeing other things, and I love art.
Tell me about your other philanthropies.
Most of it is schooling, most of it is education, and things like Metropolitan Museum, Carnegie Hall, Metropolitan Opera, Albert Einstein, FIT, Wharton School, then a few Jewish, Israel. We have a building, not bonds, but
building?
Jerusalem.
Does Tony have a list of all those?
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm probably more philanthropic than I should be for the amount of money I make, but my father always had an expression, if it doesn't hurt, it's not charity, and it started to hurt.
Tell me about your children. Why aren't you thinking about the girls being part of your business, since Laura has already vaulted that line?
Well, they don't want to be.
They don't want to be part of your business?
No, my daughter Susan might, but she's got to make up her own mind. And my daughter Andrea doesn't, at this stage, doesn't want to be.
Are you attracting more women to your business?
Yes.
That's where the fire in the belly is,
My nephew I have a nephew who runs Head Sportswear, and he's bright as hell.
Tell me about him. You write his name down.
Andy Gross. He's done a great job.
All right.
Alan, I believe that people from your family, if they really want to go into a business, I think and they have the ability, I think it's wonderful, because I think they really care, and they take a tremendous personal interest. Not to say other people don't, but
it's also they've been bred. They've absorbed something at the breakfast table that nobody from the outside ever does.
Exactly. So
It's as close to genetic as you can get.
Right. My one daughter, my youngest daughter, wants to be an actress, and I think they have to. I'm not going to force anybody to go into my business. And,
No, but I was just curious. Because with Laura in the business, I thought surely your girls would begin to see. Because
Well,
women are making it.
You see, what I don't realize, and what's probably true, is that my daughters probably have the same problem with their father that I might have had with my father,
Right.
even though I haven't wanted it to be that way. And
I know.
all right, so they might be looking at me in a larger-than-life way, even though I never think of it that way. And,
Freud wrote it for us, dear. Freud, Eugene O'Neill, you know. Fathers, daughters, fathers, sons. I mean, this is, you know, we're not all, it's not just you, it's not just me, it's the world. It's the way it is.
We have a few. Alan's got a couple of, one or two people from his family in, and they're doing wonderfully. So, you know, if they'd like, but they have to see, if anybody in my family that comes to work has to outwork everybody in the family. It can't be like I have to outwork everybody. And they have to show that they deserve it, and that they have to make themselves welcome, because they'd probably be resented today. It's not like it was when I went into the company, even though my father worked me to, I mean, I worked when other people were sleeping, and I worked at jobs and I always had to wear a jacket and tie to everything I did, because he said one day you're going to be, these people are going to have to respect you, and I want you to earn their respect right away. So I used to do the most menial jobs in jackets and ties, but that was his way of driving me. I know today some of the people that work for me, when I first came in, they're still in the company. I'm John to them, because they don't know how to call me Mr. Pomerantz. You know. I went down to Palm Beach Country Club, and half the help in Palm Beach I used to work with during the summer times, and they still call me John, and I'm Mr. Pomerantz. But, you know.
So that's nice.
I gotta go.
Okay, darling. Thank you.
Thank you. No, we're on 31st Street, right?
The 31st and 32nd. I want you to meet my husband. I don't know if you've met him.
No, I haven't.